Hi, and welcome to Spaminar. There's too many buttons. The Society of Prop Managers webinar series for live theater prop professionals. I'm Ben Holman, Spam Vice President and Props Director at the Utah Shakespeare Festival. The Society of Prop Managers, known as SPAM, was formed in 1994 by a small group of prop professionals in the Midwest to address issues of common importance and to create parity with other production departments. Today, we are an association of 150 plus prop professionals, prop managers, and educators from not-for-profit producing organizations, opera companies, and educational institutions. We've built an international communication and support network that shares resources, information, solutions, and techniques, as well as safety information, continuing education, and stock. As with previous Spaminars, we're requesting pay what you can donations to help support this programming and our annual grants for early career prop professionals. If you can afford to donate, links to donate will be in the chat. We truly appreciate any help you can give. We've enabled live transcriptions for this webinar. If you'd like to use them, click on the live transcript button on the bottom and then select show subtitle. Alternatively, you can click view full transcript to see it in the meeting side panel. I'm joined tonight by SPAM members Karen Robbie Vance and Chris Young, and Fight Choreographers Chris Duvall, Rick Sordelay, and Aaron Price to talk about how we collaborate to create authentic and safe fight and violence moments on stage. Please ask any questions you have in the chat, and we'll ask them of our guests at the end during our Q&A session. We're going to get started with quick introductions. Karen, let's start with you.
Hey, that's me. I'm Karen Robbie Vance. I am currently the president of SPAM and the head of props at the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis, Minnesota. You'll saw my bio in the intro. I've spent most of my career in regional theater working at the Alley Theater in Houston, Texas, the Geffen Playhouse in LA, and prior to that, Studio Arena in Buffalo, New York. May she rest in peace. She's an awesome theater. So I guess I get to toss it to Aaron.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much. I hope you can hear me. I am in my car from lovely Minnesota, where we just got finished with a haunted house fundraiser for my daughter's previous science teacher. So you get to see me in my lovely car. Yeah, I've been involved in doing fight direction for about almost 20 years now. And Karen and I get to work together on a number of shows throughout the seasons. I've been lucky enough to be over at the Guthrie for the past, since 2016. So yeah, I'm just thrilled to be a part of this. I've heard about Chris and Rick, and so to get to virtually meet them is fantastic, and then also to be able to share and get some also conversations going with everybody here is just fantastic. So thank you, Karen and Ben, for inviting me to be a part of this. It's really great. Thank you.
Awesome. Yes, Chris Young.
Hi, I'm Chris Young. I've been at the Shakespeare Theater since 1990 after graduating from Cincinnati Conservatory. I spent most of my career here in the DC area, though a little bit of outreach, the work I did in Cincinnati in grad school and with the Playhouse, and then some outreach down into the Richmond area. Rick and I have been working together. Rick, forgive me, I was like, I can't remember what the play was, but we met back in the late 90s, and our meeting will be part of the discussion today. So I'm going to throw it on to Rick.
Well, thank you both, Ben and Karen. Really a pleasure to be here. Nice to be with such esteemed colleagues, and with Chris and Aaron, it's a pleasure to serve on the same panel with you both. Chris and I first met, I think it was in 1996 or 98, where we did Henry VI parts 1, 2, and 3. That was my first show with you. And it changed my career in such a beautiful way. So I'm hoping that we can talk about what it was like to collaborate with you. It was such a pleasure.
Awesome. And Chris Duvall.
Hello, everybody. I want to echo Rick and Aaron. Just such a pleasure to cyber meet you both after so many years of knowing well your names. I'm based in Salt Lake City, fight director, actor, and director around the country, and just really such a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much.
Awesome. And I'm Ben Holman from the Utah Shakespeare Festival. Chris and I have worked together as a director. He's fight choreographed for us and different things. So Awesome. So we're going to start with questions for the fight choreographers, and we'll start with Aaron, and then Rick, and then Christoval. Kind of a two-part question. A little bit about when you like to be brought into the process on a show, and how quickly, soon you want to get the prop shop involved, and how that communication kind of works from your side. So we'll start with Aaron.
Yeah, I think it's always to be brought in early is wonderful. The earlier the better, and I think that's kind of across the board in terms of everything. But in terms of like how I like to be involved and communicated with and all that, it really comes down to being included into the conversation as much as possible. There's been so many times with Karen and I where it's reaching out on a project that's months ahead of time, but that I get contracted and know that okay, we're gonna possibly have something breaking. Like what is that gonna look like? We're gonna have for I know Karen and I are gonna talk about this as well, but for the people there's numerous things that were going on, and like, okay, how is this all gonna work? What can we do with this? And just having those conversations, starting in email or even just catching each other, but the ability to be able to just open those lines of communication doesn't need to be anything formal. It can be something really informal, but just to know that the fight direction is being thought of across the board and through the departments, and also to have an advocate for those other departments. It's like you've got an ally in the props department is just so fantastic, and that you don't feel so much of the time. I think as fight directors, we come in and we're not a part of the theater itself. We're brought in, and to be able to have an ally that you can kind of lean on and go, who do I talk to about this, or who's a good person, or can we go and hit this together, because both of our voices talking about this safety element is going to be so much better than me saying, hey, this is a safety thing, and they're like, yeah, it's the fight director, who cares. But to have a member of the staff and somebody like the props department head is just so fantastic. So there's more, of course, and I'll pass it on.
Rick?
We're probably all going to say the same thing. The sooner, the better. What I try and do is, depending on the show, Chris and I, one of the things we did was with Disney Cruise Lines on their inaugural tour, or their inaugural ship, we created a huge fight show called Voyage of the Ghost Ship that had, God, I don't know, maybe 20 some swords involved and all kinds of different props and weapons. And so Chris was a consultant on that. Louis Shaw was a sword maker, and Disney had no idea how to maintain the weapons. And so Chris was able to, from the ground up, order the tools, order the things that were needed in order for them to be out at sea and deal with any problem that they could come up with. So that required a great deal of collaboration between all departments, because we were anticipating not just your usual production, but a production that was literally out at sea. I mean, more so than when you're on the road and you're someplace where you can go to a Home Depot, or you can go to some kind of a store and get something. When you're at sea, that's it. It's whatever you can figure out. Somebody just said in the chat that they worked on Voyage of the Ghost Ship. Who is that? Anyway, when it comes to that kind of stuff, I like to have a paper trail. I like to make sure that I'm emailing everything as well as talking to people. I think it's a good idea that, on this day, we talked about this, this, and this, and we try and mitigate the confusion that can sometimes happen, because many times in regional theater, y'all are working on more than one show at a time. You've got shows that you're trying to deal with from strike and shows that you're getting ready for the next one. And so we just want to try and make sure that our bar of the spectrum is very clear. When you're working on Broadway and you're working with IATSE, it's a whole different story. You're dealing with not just a prop head, but a union itself, and there's a lot of rules that go with that. And so we don't share the same kind of informal opportunities with IATSE that we do in regional theater or off-Broadway. So it depends on where you're working and who you're working with. At the end of the day, you're hoping that your relationship with the director will have the director wanting to include the fight directing in all meetings as soon as possible, including with casting. And I like to get with props way before we even meet the actors so that we're clear about who's providing what. We have the conversation about blood so that costumes, props, and fight direction is all on the same page. Those of you who work in film are discovering that fight directors or stunt coordinators don't handle the guns, especially since Rust. And you're having to collaborate with armorers and with union props people. So there's a lot of communication that has to happen. And at the end of the day, just checking, like everybody has learned that with best practices, we're all works in progress. And so we're trying very hard to be good collaborators and not make this about anything other than the work. And so that's another part of, the bigger picture, is that what we bring to the table and how we bring to the table is an important part of the trust that goes into working with the other props, or I should say department heads, and with the actors as well. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that's great. Christopher.
Yeah, there's not really anything I can offer that my colleagues haven't already well gone into. This piece of being brought in early and often, and creating a paper trail, and having the conversations be thorough and deep, and having the fight director be seen more and more as a central member of the design team is very important. I always like to form a professional relationship with this area of prop management, and to ensure that whoever is in charge of that area and I become more or less of a team to create further advocacy for safety and effectiveness in all areas of violence. And as Rick was talking about in terms of these firearm issues in relationship to regional theater, looking at coordinating with the props department in firearm tests, in paper tests, and advocating for not only a paper trail of what that activity has been, but also I like to create a video trail as well of some of those tests that have been accomplished.
So now we're going to flip a little bit, and prop supervisor, we'll start with Karen, and then we'll go to Chris Young. Talk a little about kind of how early you want to get information, and then how you guys coordinate with fight choreographers and directors to make sure that things are safe and getting to rehearsal and stuff when needed.
It's going to sound a little bit like an echo chamber. The earlier the better, always. Spending most of my career in regional theater, I've had the great fortune of working with a bunch of resident or local fight choreographers. Aaron being my most recent here at the Guthrie, and working on all the productions we do together. And that's a really wonderful, because we can build this relationship over time and build that trust so that we start understanding each other's language and how to solve problems together, and we can keep building that relationship. So each show builds on the next in terms of what we're able to do and how we communicate with each other. It's a little different. Rick, you and I have worked together a number of times back when I was down at the Alley. And I think that there's, and certainly even at the Guthrie, occasionally we bring in an outside or out of town fight choreographer. And I think that the dynamic there is a little different. I don't think the communication is different. That is, we still want to early and often and clear expectations. I think that the difference is if there is an out-of-town fight choreographer, my first request to my management, my production management, is when can we fly them in way pre-production to see what we have in stock, to see if they feel that it is fight worthy, what holes we may need to fill, what do we need to purchase, rent, buy, etc. Because if you're going to order, and I think Rick, we've done this on a few shows that we've done together, where we ordered custom swords from Lewis Shaw. And if you order a custom sword to be built for a show, you have to back that up 6 months, 5 months, because those custom sword builders, of who they're very few and far between, who are really of the quality that you want to put on stage, are in high demand. So you have to get on their build schedule. So like when can they come visit? Certainly Aaron being local, it's awesome. I can be like, hey, Aaron, when do you want to swing by and take a look at what we have? So it's kind of creating that, starting that conversation early. At the Guthrie, we actually usually have all of our fight choreographers in by the time we're talking concepts on shows, and department heads, including myself, are involved at the concept level. So when really the ideas are being developed around the show, we can start having input on what we have, what we might need, which also helps inform budget. There's certainly, we're doing at the Guthrie the histories later this season. Aaron is not my fight guy for that one, but we have a sizable budget. How much of that, knowing that we're doing the histories and we don't have a large sword stock, are we going to need to dedicate to getting the weapons we need for the show? I feel like there's something else I was going to say, but I don't remember what it was. But yeah, early and often.
Okay. Chris Young.
I'd like to pick up on something that Karen just said in her phrase of language, that the more you get to work with the same fight director, the more you start understanding each other's language. And it's just such a gift that when directors are willing to bring back not necessarily the same, but at least a group of people who've been in your spaces, who you've had these conversations before, and when they ask for something, there's an understanding there. And then we can help educate stage management, because, as I like to point out, there's many names sometimes for the same sword. Many people were working on the same problem all across the world, and they all gave it different names. And so if the lead actor wants to call it an arming sword, I'm sorry, it's a fire alarm. Our fire panel is actually in malfunctioning, and we have a fire watch, so that should go off in a second. Anyway, if the lead actor wants to call it an arming sword, we're all just going to call it an arming sword. It doesn't matter. But everybody needs to have the same language. Otherwise, your notes are wrong. There's a big misunderstanding about who is holding on to what, and it just leads into the massive confusion that you don't want during a tech week. So language is, and all of us speaking the same language is very helpful. And again, frequently and often, I get get our season way before they hire anyone. So I'm already reading the scripts and figuring out, oh, that's a fight. Oh, that's a stab. So I'm already asking those questions of my productions management, of the people who are budgeting the shows. I'm already poking people that, yes, there should be a fight director for this slap. Yes, we should have mats for the wrestling scene. You know, these things are getting started even before necessarily they've announced the season. They may not have announced the directors or the artistics team, but I'm already working on that. So I've got a baseline for when the fight directors come in, where we can get started to work.
Cool. I would agree. At Utah, we don't have any resident fight choreographers because we're so remote, but we tend to latch on to someone for several years. Like Chris was here for a couple of years, and they did our educational tour and then directed for us. The last couple years, we've had 2 fight choreographers, one who also does intimacy, but we keep them for 3 or 4 years and then look for somebody new to keep things fresh and interesting. So it's a little frustrating because we build up that language over time and get to know them, and they know our stock really well. We now have an inventory so they can actually look at our stock online during design meetings and that kind of stuff. But as soon as we sort of get that conversation and that language happening, then we have to get somebody new and we have to sort of train them again. So I think that is a really big part of it. We also we plan a year to 18 months out. So try to get people involved early. We're in rep, so we may have 5 or 6 shows. They're all doing fights, and so scheduling all of the fight rehearsals around all the other shows can also be a challenge. But yeah, I think early and often, and the language thing, I think is really important too. Awesome. Okay, so now the fun part. We're gonna start with Karen and Aaron. I know you guys just did a crazy show, but 1 or 2 instances of process and how the collaboration worked and kind of the results and that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Oh goodness. I'm just going to start by saying that the show's For the People, written by Larissa Fasthorse and Ty Defoe. It's a world premiere at the Guthrie, and if it is on your seasons, prop folks, if it is on your seasons in future years, please reach out because it's got a lot of crazy stuff happening.
Yep.
Yeah, Aaron, do you want to talk about your part of that craziness?
Yeah, sure. The first time I got the script and read it, I was like, oh, okay, so we have rain and mud and set destruction, and then we also have a fight that happens, as well as somebody getting shot with an arrow on stage. And they have to be on stage, and it's a full arrow shot to the actor. And yeah, I put the script down and I'm like, well, let's send an email up to Karen and see what's going on and what ideas that we might possibly have. And I had known of options, and any of the time that I had arrows or crossbows or anything like that, it was always discussed about shooting them off into the wings and figuring out all that. This was not going to be possible. And luckily Karen just has a wealth of knowledge and just like, what do you think? And if you want to take over from there.
So I've had the same experience as Aaron, in that I've shot crossbows, I've shot arrows on stage, but usually off stage into a big curtain that nobody was in front of, and it was a very safe movement. So having somebody with basically a long bow on stage, needing to shoot another actor, we talked about all sorts of different options. We talked about having a line between the bow itself and the actor who was getting shot that the arrow could travel along. So it was more of a, I want to say gravity, but it wouldn't be gravity.
Yeah. Well, and also just
Some
kind
kind
of
of
controlled.
trajectory.
So,
Yeah.
that the arrow couldn't go into the audience in any possible way.
Yeah. I think we talked about sleight of hands, of like doing the drop and then he has another one. And then it was in some meeting, you came by my office one day and like it was some offhand comment about like paintball or something.
Right.
And you left and I Googled paintball arrow and I discovered this whole like thing that happens where people actually shoot paintball arrows at each other. But then that led me to LARPing arrows, that is live action role play arrows, which are giant foam tipped arrows that are safe to shoot at other humans. And I sent a link. I'm
Right.
like, hey,
Yeah.
what do you think of this? And then we went down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. Yeah, and then we did
That's
a couple
actually
tests and, found a variety that of uh, type that we actually enjoyed, that had less impact, um, could be shot over a good distance, but we noticed that after about 12 feet, because of the weight on the head, they dive down pretty significantly. But adjusting how the actor was holding the bow allowed for a little bit longer trajectory, and just figuring out what then our staging was going to be based off of the limitations of the prop, uh, allowed us to create the fight in a safe way so that the actors are taken care of, and the audience and the crew, so that everybody is in a good safe position. So
and some of that from our end was we had two bows in stock that had strings on them. They were prop bows. I don't the strings on them. So in a typical longbow situation, for if you're in shooting things to, not be safe, you want the string to be 3 to 4 inches shorter than the length of the curve of the bow. Ours was about inch and a half shorter, so it wasn't as strong as a real bow. We actually swapped it out for a string that was a little tighter, but still not the full draw of 20 to 30 pounds. We actually did a draw test on the bow at the request of Equity. And the draw strength on our bow was a whopping 10 pounds. I also, when the arrows came in, I asked one of my team members, I'm like, all right, you get to shoot me now. And I put myself in the line of fire before I put anybody else in that line of fire. We had two different types. We had one that had like this big foam disc on the front, and we had another one that was like a plastic encased domed. That one actually hurt a little bit more, so we opted to lay it to the side. And then we invited Aaron into the room and did some tests with Aaron, and then we took it to a production meeting where Aaron and our director actually shot each other. Yeah. The other thing that is fairly new to me, and I don't know if if this is a change in equity, but there's now a form that our production management team is having fill out for every production that has it's like a risk assessment form, and we filled it out with all of our known information. And equity came back 3 different times with 3 different sets of very smart questions for us to answer. So I'm happy to see that they're actually looking at the safety of these things as well, and making sure that things are as safe as possible. Yeah. The other thing Aaron and I embarked on over this past year, when I started at the Guthrie, it was interesting for me to discover that there was no weapons policy. There's no procedures or protocols in place for how weapons, including firearms, or anything pointy or that can shoot a bow, shoot an arrow, would be run, who would manage them backstage, how the tracking would be. So together, I did a draft of a first draft of a weapons policy, and the first person I sent it to was Aaron. And I said, can you please proof this? And make edits and make suggestions. And together we kind of fine-tuned that policy. It's now 4 pages long, encompasses all of the things. I'm happy to share it with anybody who might want it. So just feel free to drop me an email and I'll forward it to you. What am I forgetting, Aaron?
yeah, well, I think with that, I mean, having Karen reach out about the procedures, it was already in alignment with everything that I request when I come in, and that was just fantastic to have, the props department have that foresight and be able to take out, some of the risks, before the actors even get in the room. And so to have that as now policy within the theater is just so fantastic, and just to be able to lean on that and collaborate on it, because there were questions that came up of like, well, okay, we've got how we handle the weapons in the rehearsal room, and we have how we handle the weapons in the theater, but how do we get the weapons from the rehearsal room to the theater? What's our track there, or what's our track backstage, or what's our track when they are being transitioned in the rehearsal room during like a designer run? How are we making sure that we don't have firearms sitting out, but we also have our stage management able to do what they need to do? And so there's just a lot of those questions and um, problems to just kind of needle in on and figure out, which has just been fantastic to have that support.
I will add to that. One of I won't say a complicating factor. One of the factors at the Guthrie, to a point that Rick made earlier, is that we have a union. We're IATSE. We're an IATSE house. So my entire team is union, as are all of our stagehands. So as a manager, I am not. I cannot work on any props. I cannot build props. So I'm really relying on my team and our stagehands to operate things. And the nice thing about having this policy and procedures in place is it sets up expectations for them of what it is that Aaron and I need to make sure that things are run safely. So it's kind of an expectation setter as well. Dean, I just in the questions, Aaron, Dean asked were the arrows being shot to the back or to the front of the performer, and they were kind of a mid-body, mid-torso shot. But do you want to talk about working with the actor in the rehearsal room? Because I think you and one of my union members actually worked with her for
Yeah,
a big chunk of the
yeah,
day.
we spent about an hour just going through and helping the performer become comfortable with the act of shooting an arrow at another person. And so the props person and myself spent time showing them, proper holding, grabbing, knocking, all of that, the makeup, the anatomy of a bow and all those things, and just the foam, and allowing them to touch it and squish it and all of that, and then taking several shots and showing that it was not unpleasant. Um, but that it was, something that was doable and could be done repeatedly. And then we allowed them to fire at me. But at first we had them fire at a target and just get comfortable, and they zeroed in and got better and better about their accuracy. And then I, asked if they were comfortable, if they wanted to fire at me, and they were like, let me go a few more times, and just allowing them to become comfortable with the process and with the act of doing it. And then eventually they were like, yeah, let's get you in there. And so then they fired at me several times, and got their accuracy down. And then they just had about a week of firing at the target when they wanted to during rehearsal, and about after a week they were comfortable with wanting to take a shot at the other performer that they were working with, which in the story is actually an elder, and so there's that added dynamic of someone who is elderly, that you just don't want to hurt anybody, but especially don't want to knock out one of our older performers. But they've taken it, and uh, been considerate of each other and how it's gone, and it's just a building process. you know, and having props there and to have all of the knowledge that we had in terms of the pull strength and you know, just really dialing in on, we tried different uh lengths on the string, as Karen had said, and we came to a string length that was uh happy for me and also happy for the performer, and was also supporting what the playwright and director were also looking for. And that was the important thing as well, because there were other strengths that people were very excited about, and it was like, no, let's go with the one where we're all happy with, and that was very important. So.
Awesome. Rick and Chris Young. Process at DC Shakespeare.
So I've told this story, and Rick loves when I tell the story because I'm telling it on myself. When Rick and I first started working, I was the props artisan and armorer, and I walked into the rehearsal hall to drop off the day's request and found that all of these spear points had been taped over, and that there were balls of gaff tape adhered to all the points. And I was at that point on a little bit more of the tough love, this is the prop, you guys need to get used to it sort of philosophy with theater props and theater weapons. And Rick walked in, and we'd only met once, and he said, "Hey, how's it going? What's up? What are you doing?" And I said, "Some profanity idiot put tape all over my spears. Do you know who would do this?" And and he's like, "Well, I would be that idiot." So of course I've embarrassed myself. And then I went, "Why?" And he said, "We have two people in the cast that are very reluctant, and I just needed them to pick up the spear and move through the space. And to be honest, you know, if I could have taken the spearheads off, I would have. But by doing this and having them help me do it, they're now moving through space, and we're now starting the choreography." And so then I had to go into the trash can and get all the tape balls out, and Rick and I retaped all the spears. And then, of course, I had to go back and tell my boss why I was a half an hour late coming back from rehearsal. So one of the things that Rick has taught me is that thing about, what are you going to do when you have the reluctant fighter? What are you going to do when you have someone who is not in impeccable shape? When you've handed over the prop that you've worked on for a very, very long time, and they say, "It's beautiful, but it's too heavy. I can't work with this." And that's where, you know, Rick and I have worked together, kind of combining our knowledge. So, Rick, can you help me out with this? Can you suggest an action or an exercise for the actor so that they are more comfortable with the prop weapon that we're using? And sometimes we're successful, often we're not. But working together that way, I mean, we put together a very complicated series of actions that, you know, as you were saying about the arrow shooting, was just built in. How do you build the confidence? How do you keep them working? Then, you know, the tape ball gets a little smaller. The tape comes off the edge. We find out where the little problems are, and we either smooth things over, literally smooth things off, or round things over. I think this was also the show that I learned as a prop person. If an actor said a blade is sharp, it doesn't necessarily mean it's cutting sharp. It just means that there's some edge. And what I realized is, because I work with my hands, I have calluses that the performers don't. So what I do and what I teach my staff to do is it looks like we're cutting our wrist. We're not, but we move off of our hands and onto our forearms. And that's where you touch, after you've checked it with a cloth and made sure, you think there's no problem. If the actor is still saying there's an edge, that's what you do. And it also helps if you have fuzzy arms because it'll catch the hairs on your arms. But make the assumption that they are right. No matter what you've done, they have felt it. And going back and helping them take care of that problem means they're supported and they're more open to the choreography that your choreographer is making because you've given them something they feel safe with. You want to jump in here, Rick?
Yeah, I just want to say that working with Chris, and I hope we can talk a little bit more about firearms because I have never been more comfortable with anybody in any situation than Chris when talking about firearms. We did a lot of shows together with firearms. We did a production of Coriolanus where we had, when we first staged it, we had over 100 rounds being shot off. And, luckily, we pared that down so it was more manageable, but we had shotguns and Berettas and all manner of guns that were being shot off, including for that production, we even had a president come, and Chris will tell a story of, the Secret Service being present when we loaded all the blanks and then being present with a line of fire from backstage to the actors who are actually handling the guns on stage. And so it's not your usual run-of-the-mill situation that props and fight directors go through, but sometimes in a place like, especially like Washington, D.C., where you have extreme VIPs, then it's up to the props department to sometimes have to think through elements of what we do and how we do it, even beyond the safety of the actors and the audience. Chris brings up a really good point, and it's the psychological one. One of the things that I learned doing 12 years of stunt coordination on Guiding Light, which was a daytime TV show, is you got to work fast, but it can't compromise the safety. And a lot of times the safety is brought to the attention because an actor is feeling unsafe. And 9 times out of 10, it's not because the action is unsafe, it's unsafe in here. Case in point, we did Wait Until Dark on Broadway with Quentin Tarantino and Marissa Tomei. And we had a knife on stage and it was dulled and it was completely acceptable. But Marissa was playing the young blind woman and she was in the dark with the knife and she kept saying, "Oh, Rick, it's still too sharp. It's still too sharp." And so, I would take it home and I would keep rounding off the tip until finally the tip was like my thumb. And so she said, "Oh, Rick, it's just still a little too sharp." I was like, okay. So I put it in my bag. I went home. I came back the next day. I took it out of my bag and said, "How do you think this is now?" Because I used diamond sandpaper. And she was like, "What?" I said, "Yeah, I got this really special sandpaper made out of diamond chips. And so I rounded it off. How does it feel?" And she goes, "Oh, it's perfect." So yeah, it was kind of like a little shitty thing to do. But at the same time, I just couldn't, I'd have to make it flat in order to ground it down anymore. And so by appealing to where her thoughts were and her fear was, and by bringing into the equation something that really didn't exist, but in her mind solved the problem, then we got through it just fine. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should be nefarious with all of our actors, but there are times where you have to take that step into what is really going to please them. How much do they need to be in control? And then how do you give them the feeling that that control has now brought them to the safety level that they want? The thing that I loved about working with Chris at Shakespeare Theater in DC, there was never a request that he wasn't willing to fulfill. There was never a time where, we might look at each other and kind of like, well, that's the request and okay, but there was never a time where it was a no, or it was that's stupid. It was a deep respect to honor the process for an actor, no matter what our personal opinions were. It was still something that shows Chris's deep professionalism for the job. And we did lots of shows, and we did big shows. We did Tamburlaine the Great, and we did so many of these shows. We did Henry IV parts 1 and 2 together a couple of times. We had to hang people, like from a second story where they jumped off and had to do a ballistic hang. And so there was a lot of stuff that we had to do together. But what we would do is we would put our heads together, we would think through it carefully, we would use our common sense, and we would also reach out. There were things where, utilizing all the contacts that you had, where we might reach out to special effects people or professional magicians to come up with solutions that fight directors and props people shouldn't be doing. Like, that's just not really our job, but in order to satisfy it, we have to. When we talk about budgets and money, there's never been a time in the theater where there's unlimited funds. There just hasn't. In regional theater as well. I've been a board president. I've been on the board 22 years at Shakespeare Theater, New Jersey, and a board president for 2 of them. I'm on the board with Red Bull now. Anybody who's ever served on a board knows that you literally count every dime. I mean, you really count every dime, and they all count. Every ounce of it counts. And so you're constantly looking for ways to save money. But the thing you can't do is save money at the way to hurt your production. So you're having to prioritize what can we do and what can't we do. With the Guthrie, we just did Shane together, and that was a co-production that we did in Cincinnati. But the Guthrie was like, we can't afford to send both fight directors out, so only one of you can go. And it was like, we get it. No one's mad at that. It's just we work as a team, but under the circumstances, only one team member was going to be able to go out and do this. And so we work around that as well, not because we want to, because we recognize that we have to. Even with the shows like Lion King and Beauty and the Beast, which, are big, expensive shows that Disney Theatrical invests a lot of money in, believe me, they're counting their dimes just as hard as a not-for-profit is, because everything counts, especially now. So when Chris and I can put our heads together and we can come up with solutions that end up saving money, and I mean big money for companies, there's never really a thank you, because a lot of times people don't even recognize that we've done it. I think everybody on this panel has probably saved their theaters literally tens of thousands of dollars, and sometimes on just a single show, by our ingenuity and our judgment. And it's just one of those things that goes with the territory. No one's going to slap us on the back or write us a bonus check. It's just what it is. So that was some of the things, Chris, if you want to talk about your gun work, I mean, my God, it's just the best. But I've always been impressed with how you handle guns on stage and the way you make actors feel comfortable.
Is this okay, Ben? Or is we running it over your time?
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
I guess I'd like, since we're bringing this up, again, me moving away from the tough love sort of thing. One of the things working with Rick, occasionally I'd be reading through the notes and I'd get back in touch with him, and I'd be like, why didn't you make that decision? Why are we following this lead where this actor is going? And he taught me that the more that he involved them in the decision, the more they owned it, the more comfortable they were with it. And if he needed to nudge them around to some other direction, that was fine, as long as they were in at that initial stage and were buying in, and that comfort level. So one of the things we do at the Shakespeare Theater before any firearm or anything that looks like a firearm goes to rehearsals, we do have a safety talk, which I do. And again, I had started kind of with the tough love sort of phrasing, but we did a performance of Kiss Me Kate, and it's a very simple effect. Someone shoots a pistol up in the air and a bird falls. But when we were talking about, potential problems in general about firearms, I realized I had lost 4 members of the cast. They were just now afraid, and I had done it. They weren't the ones who handled the weapons. They were not going to be on stage when the effect happened, but they were just afraid. So what I realized, and I went to those actors first, and I started talking to them about what we do here and that it's done for their safety, and not just their safety, the safety of the performers, the audience, the crew, everyone that's in that building. And that we have at the Shakespeare Theater a tradition of really holding on to that principle in all of the fight choreography, especially in firearms. And after talking to the four of them and getting them to at least be somewhat okay, I won't say they were always comfortable, we worked to that, I realized I needed to change my talk. And that's actually where I start now. I start by telling them that we have this tradition, this talk is part of the tradition, and we have an excellent safety record, and I can take no credit for it because the safety is done by the actors and the crew and the stage managers, and that everyone who comes here has accepted that responsibility of keeping each other safe. And that this talk is now welcoming everyone who hasn't been here before to our tradition of helping each other stay safe. And it has totally changed the attitude. And this was way before Rust, that using what Rick taught me about bringing them in right away and making them powerful means that everyone is working in the same direction. We haven't had, you'd occasionally have a problem with an actor that couldn't keep their weapon in their holster. I haven't had that problem anymore because everyone is now working on the same page. And I've also been fortunate. I mean, Michael Kahn was our artistic director at the time, and we worked up to the larger firearm shows, and he saw the benefit of giving up rehearsal time for us to work out these safety things. And if you're talking about, board members and budgets, there's nobody who counts harder than directors in time and rehearsal. And so getting him to convince visiting directors that, yes, this is a good idea. Yes, these people giving up the time now will save you time and tech. Again, we're back to as early and often as you can. As early and often as you can get your actor to shoot the bow. As early and often as your head of gabbler comes and wants to practice drawing and pulling the trigger of the pistol. You're going down and meeting with her 2 or 3 times a day at the beginning of rehearsal. Can you set up a day that everybody's out of the building and you actually have a live fire rehearsal so that everybody's actually heard the sounds, done the action, and that's all done before you get to stage. An artistic team giving up those 2 hours of rehearsal so they can save 4 hours in tech. It's sometimes a hard sell, but once you get it done and the word gets out that this really works, it's very helpful to the whole process. And again, falling back to the more that the actor is confident, the easier it is for them to be safe because they're not worried about what they're doing. They can just relax, do the action, move through the scene, drop their stuff where they're supposed to drop it, and move on. And that confidence helps keep them safe. Rick, do you want to jump in?
I think you said it so beautifully, brother. It's just, it's like I said, it's always been a pleasure working with you and watching how you handle the actors. I just have so many great memories of the way that you just made everybody so comforted because it was straightforward. It was very common sense. Our company doesn't use the word trigger anymore. We use activate. The reason we use activate is because you can deactivate, but you can't de-trigger. So the reason I bring that up is because when Chris would do his work, if an actor did get activated about the work, I would watch Chris very skillfully deactivate the situation because he taught me that what defeats fear is knowledge, especially when it comes to gunplay. The more we can teach, the better everybody felt. The more they felt like they had a handle on it because they were able to touch it. Because of Chris, when I do gun day, I let everybody come up. Everybody who's going to be connected with the show, everybody on all ends of it. And then I give them a few minutes to say, anybody who wants to touch the gun, this is the time to do it. Because once we are done with this, then nobody gets to touch the gun. And I want to dissipate and dispel anybody's thought that they want to try and handle the gun when nobody's looking. Do it now while we're all here. And that has been immeasurably helpful in my career. And so, Chris, I owe you so many beers and steaks. It's unbelievable. But I hope that's helpful, brother.
Awesome. Thank you both. Chris Duvall, and you can actually answer one of the questions that come up because you do a lot of educational theater as well. How do you deal with less than athletic performers or performers who are not used to dealing with weapons? Like how do you deal with those kinds of issues?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I'm actually going to piggyback off of what Chris and Rick were talking about in terms of that. I remember Joe Hodge talking about whether it's quantitatively true or not. He would say that the hardest job in American theater is the actors, and so how to process and move forward in any of our jobs with at least a possibility that their job is maybe one of the hardest, if not the hardest, more challenging. Obviously, we all have challenging jobs. In terms of academic theater, I mean, that's definitely a hat that I wear. And in terms of effectiveness and safety, I'm always ensuring that the violence in an academic scenario is safe first and foremost. If I can get it to be effective, great. But I'm focusing on making sure that it's safe. In regional theater, I need to do both. But I feel like my first priority in academic theater is that it's a pedagogical, it's a learning experience. It's an opportunity for students to learn and grow. I just taught a firearms workshop where I love that term, Rick, where a student was definitely activated, and we navigated through, we as fight directors, as prop managers, we don't know what necessarily is happening with an individual actor or a young person in relationship to their history. I was working on a professional production, I'm sort of veering off topic, but working on a professional production of Play That Goes Wrong, Pioneer Theater Company, where I serve as their resident fight director. And we all know this production, and the actor who gets slammed in the head with a door was having a hard time at this moment. And I talked to her, and she said, "Look, my dad died 3 weeks ago from a head injury. So is there an additional safety we can provide here, right?" And so that, to answer your question, Ben, in terms of working with academic actors, it's really all the same for me, whether it's academic actors or professional actors, approaching the work with a sense of compassion, understanding, and acknowledging that they've got hard jobs to do.
Awesome. We have a couple of questions and we're running out of time, so anybody can jump in and answer these, and then we'll wrap up. There was a question about job creep. Prop master being asked to, it's just a single slap, or we're just breaking this one thing. Can you just like teach the actors instead of us bringing in a fight person, or asking a fight choreographer, do you have some weapons that we can just, when you come do this, can you just bring them along versus like, the theater providing them? Does anyone have anything to say about that? Go ahead, Rick.
A lot of times I like to bring my own weapons because I don't always trust the stock. I could go into story after story after story. I will say this, never at Shakespeare Theater with Chris Young's weapons, but we did a production one time at a theater that's very well known, and they brought in a box of knives for the Scottish play, and somebody picked up a knife and went like this, screwing around, and the blade broke because it was one of those little wall hangers that had that little spot well, and you couldn't see it because it was covered up by the handle. So when we talk about weapons, I'm always looking for, I want something that has really been tested to be fight worthy. And I really take that word into account. I ask my actors that when they are doing any work, that if they're working with props that have to be used as weapons, they must be fight worthy. Too often they're handed something that somebody purchased. It was inexpensive, and it turns out that there's a reason it was inexpensive. So it depends on the show. There are times as a fight director, I will bring the weapons. Sometimes it's easier to do that. Sometimes it's easier on the props people if I just say, hey, I've got that. After a 35-year career, I've got an entire room devoted to a bunch of stuff that I've been keeping. So if I can say to Karen, hey, I got it, and Karen goes, thank God that's one off the list, then we're good to go. And I don't necessarily always ask for a rental. There are times where I know that Karen's budget is maxed and it's no big deal to me. I'll just go, great, I'll just bring it, and it's just something that we do with each other. Lately, I find that favors are worthless. I find that people have been just absolute shit about honoring favors. And that really breaks my heart, because there was a time, and I think everybody on this panel probably remembers a day when you used to do favors for each other and that was honored. But it's not so much the case anymore. And it's not because people are being nefarious or awful. It's just because budgets are such that we can't always honor the favors. Me personally, I'm going to continue doing favors. I don't expect anything for them. I feel like it's part of my job. So that's my 2 cents. Gentlemen?
I just same fully echo just what you said, Rick. I mean, I have an entire armory that I have rented out on occasion, but also it's mostly there to just be able to bring in on a job that I'm a part of, and just if it works, great. But I know the quality is there, and again, it's also having those conversations with the prop department of just like, do you know about any of the amazing folks that are out there? I mean, Lewis is fantastic. Neil with Rogue Steel is another fantastic group that's out there. There's a handful here in the States that make really fantastic weapons that are reliable, and just sharing that knowledge. For the most part, most of all of you here know about all of those folks, but occasionally you come across some props departments that just haven't heard of them, and just to be able to share that knowledge is part of the collaborative process.
Yep, agreed on both counts, of course. I would say that Rick, Aaron, and I are going to agree on everything here, which is a great testament to our field. Yeah, just worked on a production a year or so ago, R&J, Great Lakes Theater, and Idaho Shakes, and they needed weapons, and I have a bunch, and they weren't able to afford what it would cost to rent them from a company or rent or purchase them. And so we worked out a deal, and it's like there's been so much generosity shown to me over the years on many different levels. And I feel like it's my responsibility to pay that forward.
Awesome. I think this is a great question to end on. I think everybody can jump in if you want to. The question is, how do you deal with a director that is asking for something unsafe? Weapon, actor, motion, whatever. Can the prop person bring up the safety issues, even if it's not directly related to the prop? Or is it best to bring those concerns to the TD, or what? My personal opinion is anybody can bring up a safety issue. You need to be in an environment where that's okay, but I feel like anybody should be able to say, this feels unsafe. I, as a spectator, feel unsafe, or I feel like the action is unsafe, or whatever, and that should be sort of the process, and anybody should be allowed to weigh in. But anybody else have thoughts or opinions? I saw lots of shaking head.
I'm with you on that, and one of the things I bring forward to, especially to directors, if I need a little bit of leverage, is everybody's okay with Romeo being threatened, but when Romeo is really George and people are afraid that George is going to get hurt, you've just lost everyone from the story. They're no longer paying attention to Romeo and Juliet. They're worried that George is going to fall off the damn wall. So being able to phrase it that way about how is this still going to advance the story? How is this still going to advance the direction of this motion, or this motion within the play, is a good way to do that. Or, I mean, I'll just throw this one out there. It happens at least, well, it probably won't happen for a long time now, but it used to happen to me every 5 years that somebody wanted automatic fire on stage. And I just had to dig out the paperwork again and explain to them that, one, yeah, we can do it. Two, the paperwork will be done in barely enough time. And three, it will eat your entire budget. And four, you will deafen the audience. So, it's all about making it. And I have had to go to the managing director a couple of times to stop that. But, there are people above the director if it is completely unsafe. You shouldn't be afraid to go to your managing director or your head of production. You do need to have your ducks in a row. You can't just say, I'm uncomfortable with this. You need to be able to lay out your case. This is why it is unsafe. There is no reason in my small theater to shoot off a full load blank. This sort of swinging over the audience is going to run into this unsupported part of the architecture, which is going to fall. So it does need to be clear, but you should never hesitate.
I want to add to that there are always people, as a prop person, there's always production management, there's always general management, there's always managing director, artistic director. If there's something that is being done unsafe, and as a prop person, you don't feel like your voice is being listened to or heard, do not be afraid to elevate it to other parties. The one thing none of us have mentioned yet is the partnership that props and fight choreography and stage management need to have together. We create this pyramid with a fight choreographer at the top and stage management and props on the next level. And we're the ones in partnership with stage management who's responsible for keeping things safe, keeping an eye on it through not only all of rehearsal and the run and the performance run, but being the first to flag if there is something we see happening that's unsafe. Yes, anybody should say anything's unsafe anytime they see it, but we're the ones with stage management responsible for that. So having a good, clear line of communication with stage management and setting expectations for each other with stage management is who's going to take what role, I think is also incredibly important.
That's a really good point. Awesome. We've run over a little bit, but our audience has held on. Thank you, Rick, Aaron, Chris, and Karen for all agreeing to be on this panel and having this discussion. We've been talking about it for a long time. It's great to get all this information out there. For all of you attendees, thank you for attending this evening. I hope it was a fun and informative evening and that you've learned a couple of things you can take back and use in your theaters. Stay tuned to your email and social media for information about upcoming Spaminars. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Spaminar is produced by the Society of Prop Managers with special thanks to Spam members Patrick Drone, Freed, myself, Stacey Horn Harper, Nikki Kulis, Jen McClure, Amy Peter, Sarah Pugh, Karen Robbie Vance, and Helen Straticus. Thanks again for watching, and once again, please keep your suggestions for future Spaminars coming. We want to know what you want to learn about. Prop on, and we will see you next time. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it so much. Happy Halloween, if you celebrate that.